Okay, let's bring in Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor and former presidential candidate and author of Trump and the American Future. Good morning to you, Newt.
Good morning.
Good morning. So what were your...
evening.
I'm sorry?
It was quite an evening.
Yes, what were your takeaways?
Well, first of all, South Carolina did an awful lot for the country when you have both Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, and they were both extraordinary. Scott's closing from cotton to Congress in one generation is probably as good a repudiation of all of last week's talk about racism as you could ask for. I also have to say, from a Georgia perspective, having Herschel Walker say he's known and been friends with Donald Trump for 37 years, and that Herschel, is offended when people suggest he be that close to a racist. I thought it was a complete repudiation of the left's efforts to tar President Trump. So I thought it was effective overall. Interestingly, the average speaker this week in prime time is about 9 years younger than the average speaker last week of the Democratic Party. And you saw, for example, Kim Klacik, the great new candidate in Baltimore, had almost 3 times as much time as AOC and used it very effectively to take on the corruption and the failure of liberal Democrats in big cities. So I thought it was a very effective evening, and my guess is that independents found themselves much more intrigued by the future with Donald Trump than anybody in the media expected, and that I think, despite the media's efforts, this will be a very successful convention.
You know, it's amazing, Newt. I'm surprised it's come to this, but you need Jim Jordan to tell an intimate story of what President Trump is like one-on-one. You need Tim Scott to tell a story about what he's like away from the cameras. You need Nikki Haley and others to humanize him 3 years in, because the channels and the leading newspapers go the opposite way to make him the worst person ever, ill-equipped, unable to rise to the occasion. And just some honest, true stories can counter that narrative. In fact, here's Senator Tim Scott, who also talked about one-on-one with the president's like. They have a great relationship. But he talked about the progress the economy has made for everybody. Listen.
President Trump has kicked off this convention by leaning in on the American family, wanting them to be passionate and to be expectant about what's possible in our future. A racist president does not take opportunity zones and provide up to $75 billion of private sector dollars for the most distressed people in the country. A racist president simply does not create 7 million jobs and make sure 2/3 of those jobs go to African Americans, Hispanics, and women.
So that's the person you know. I mean, that's who you write about in your book. So you knew the person before he became a politician, and now you know the person as a president. And it's a shame it had to come to this convention for people to tell these stories.
Well, look, I think the powerful thing is when your opponents develop a lie, when people see the facts, they really do change decisively. And I think that what I would frankly consider a media that is dedicated now to consistently lying is actually undermining their own credibility, not necessarily undermining the president's. Right. It was very significant in terms of what Tim Scott has personally committed to. That yesterday, the Trump administration announced that they're going to be moving federal jobs and federal offices into these opportunity zones. That is the biggest single step ever taken to try to begin to rebuild the poorest parts of American society. And I think that it's an example that, Trump has actually tried to be effective, not just sympathetic. I mean, people talk about, Joe Biden is a good person. Well, Trump's actually getting things done. And the record he has with historically black colleges and universities is better than any president in history. So I think you saw this, but you also saw something I thought fascinating, and that is everyday people. I mean, when you have a cancer survivor explaining that it was President Trump's intervention to make it possible to have a choice if you have a fatal disease, and so she's alive. That's sort of an amazing example of Trump's ability to change things, not just talk about them.
Well, speaking of talking about things, one side is lying or really distorting what's going on. at the nation's post office regarding the election. Nancy Pelosi was over on another channel. They were talking about the post office and all the problems over there, how Trump's trying to hack the election. She had this observation about, well, Mr. Speaker, guys like you, listen.
We take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with their allies in the Congress of the United States.
Okay, so it sounds like you're the ally to the domestic enemies of America. Congratulations.
Look, there's a great book called The Madness of the Crowds. And I would say that Nancy Pelosi is a perfect example of the madness of her crowd.
Yeah, it's a shame.
You want to expand on that?
Yeah, she's lost her mind.
Look,
Donald Trump has pushed her over the edge. She has been unhinged for about 6 months.
Look, I wrote a paper recently saying we're in a war between two worlds. And I think if you look at these two conventions, you'll see what I'm talking about. I mean, Pelosi's from San Francisco, a city which is collapsing, which, by the way, Harris is also from San Francisco. This is a city which is collapsing. There's a pictures just put out today of rush hour in downtown San Francisco. There's no one on the street. People are moving out of the city. The rapid transit is going broke because there are no riders. So Pelosi comes from a rich enclave in a city which is collapsing, and she brings all of those values to Washington. And frankly, they can't tell the truth. I mean, what are they going to say? Oh, yeah, it's terrific that we've produced this many homeless. It's terrific that the city now pays for you to have an apartment. They put you in a hotel and give you both drugs and alcohol to help control you. So she lives in a fantasy world, as does, frankly, Joe Biden. And so you're seeing two different worlds in two different conventions, and the average American is going to pick which world's real.
Newt Gingrich, thanks so much.
Thank you.